In the last video I showed you how to build the Counger. This time, I'm going to show you how to make the super versatile table / storage box for your Counger cushions. I told you my wife loved the Counger. She really loves this table and so do I. It was a simple one-day build including my filming time and some involvement with a 5-year-old. There are easy to follow plans on my website, so when followed along with this video, you should have no issues building this even as a beginner. The surface of the storage box stays level as you raise it into the table position, so not only is this table very useful, but it's a bit mind-blowing too. After pre-finishing all the 1x4s with waterproof outdoor finish, I began to cut the straight pieces to length. Henry and I did this on the miter saw, but a circular saw or a jigsaw with some care would work too. I set up a stop block for the repetitive cuts to reduce the time I spent measuring. I took care to keep all like pieces together and labeled. For the mitered pieces, I set my saw to 45 degrees and cut the pieces to length. If you don't have a miter saw, a speed square and a circular saw or jigsaw will work. It just may require a little more care. The parts for the mechanism are narrower than 3.5 inches, so I ripped them on my table saw. This could be done with a jigsaw. The sides are assembled using straight cuts and 1¼ inch screws. I use an offcut to offset the end piece in the proper position. Each screw should be pre-drilled to avoid splitting the wood. The screws will be on the inside of the box, so don't worry about the head showing. Notice the screws are staggered. This was done intentionally, with the screws oriented in this pattern. They act as small triangular shear braces, negating the need for an extra lateral brace. This is when I realized I had made a mistake. The vertical slats need to be offset from the bottom horizontal slat to allow for the base to be flush mounted. No problem though, this was easy to fix. You can see how this should have worked in the first place. After all the side pieces are assembled, I started to assemble the tabletop. To hold the tabletop together and to keep it relatively dimensionally stable, I screwed the tabletop to a sheet of plywood. I used 2 pieces, but that's because I didn't have a piece wide enough, so I just made it work. The internal slats of the tabletop were slipped into place and had just tight enough fit that I could flip the whole thing over and screw the slats into place from the back side using 1-inch screws. Assembling the box was a little awkward, but I found assembling it upside down not only ensured the top of the box to be flush, but each piece was stable enough to stand on its own. I unscrewed each piece together, pre-drilling of course. After taking the time to square up the box, I added the bottom slats. For the base of the box, I pre-drilled the screws from the bottom. This made it much easier to ensure the base was centered on the box. Then I flipped the box over so I could screw the base from the top. Now that it is secure, I flipped it over again to take the screws from the bottom. This is so that they don't scratch the surface the box is sitting on when moved around. I will now show you how to make the mechanism for the tabletop. I used a spray can to draw the rounded corners and mark the center of each bolt hole. The parts were cut out using my jigsaw. I used a 1/4 inch bit to drill out the bolt holes. With the first piece done, I used it as a jig for the following pieces. The holes need to be enlarged to allow the bolt head and nut to recess into the wood. I might suggest doing this before drilling the 1/4 inch hole. I then sanded the mechanism parts to get rid of all those rough edges. The mechanisms were assembled using 1/4 inch bolts and nylock nuts. My local Home Hard to Find there only had 2-inch bolts, so after tightening up, I had to use my grinder to trim the bolts before filing off the burrs. You should be able to avoid this if you can find 1.5-inch bolts. Next, the mechs were secured to the box. Be sure to inset the top of the mech by the thickness of your plywood. The mech is secured to the box side using 1 1/4 inch screws. Now angle brackets are attached flush to the top of the mechanism. With the box upright, lift the mechanisms into the up position and place the tabletop onto them. I'll admit this took a little trial and error, but luckily for you, the plans have the measurements you need to make this process easier. I use an offcut to make sure the tabletop is in line with the box sides before screwing the top to the mechanism. This took a little contorting, but in the end, it worked out great. As an optional upgrade, I decided to add bungees to make the top easier to raise. It's not fully necessary, but I like the added assistance and positive detent it adds. I can easily raise and lower the tabletop with one hand. I didn't really like how I had to grab the side of the table to lift it up. I took a little extra time to add some cutouts with my router to make it easier to lift the top. I use a simple jig and just quickly routed out some notches. The plans are available on the website now, and as an added bonus, if you buy the plans before July 15th, I will include the counter plans. Already have the counter plans? Keep an eye on your inbox. Like I said, I really love this build. To be honest, while I was designing, I was skeptical that it would work, but now that it's real, I love it. Please remember, I don't make any money off my videos, so if you like them, maybe just give me a thumbs up, maybe consider buying a set of plans to support future projects. You didn't see any ads in the beginning of this video. If you want to keep my channel that way, I'd really appreciate your support. Thanks for sticking around.